Hello, everyone. This is Craig Snow, CEO of Lightspeed Saber League, and Vice President Kevin Fournier. Kevin, welcome to the quote unquote show.
Yeah, the quote unquote show. That's the name of the show. Quote
Yeah,
unquote.
I think that's pretty good. Yeah, I just as you can see, I'm in my car, so it's a little bit impromptu. But thanks for putting up with this, and for everyone who might end up watching this. Um, we'll see if we like it, and we'll do it again if it's any good. So we recently just had the Lightspeed's first major event on the East Coast, courtesy
Yeah.
of Kevin. Kevin, congratulations on running what I thought was a great event.
Oh, good. Glad you thought so.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just wanted to chat a little bit about it. And I think the most important thing to ask is what do you think we learned from having run this, especially from your perspective?
Yeah. After running a few tournaments, you think you've learned all you need to learn, and then every tournament throws something else at you, and you learn something new. The venue we chose, I think, right off the bat, I think one of the first things we learned was floor matters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was probably one of the biggest frustrations, I think, for myself and even some of the fencers was when we got to the venue, the carpeted area was not what I thought it was. When I had seen it in advance, some of the stuff was covered, and you couldn't tell that it was just overlapping loose carpet. We couldn't fence on that, so we rolled the carpet back, and it was dusty, it was dirty, it was slippery. It worked. I don't think it ruined the tournament by any means, but it certainly was less than ideal. Um, so one thing I learned is to be a little bit more thorough when I'm checking out a venue before booking it.
Yeah, that was a very, I don't know, from my perspective, it was a very weighty decision actually, right away.
It was. It was. We were back and forth. Like, well, now what do we do? We've got floor carpeting that will not be fun, and dusty floor that might be fun. We had to basically pick our poison. Like, it wasn't an ideal situation either way.
That's right. Yeah. And I did actually take a knee on that ground at some point during the team event, actually. So that wasn't great. But I think ultimately we came to the conclusion that people kind of have to compete where they're able to compete. A basketball gym wasn't necessarily going to be softer anyway, which is a place where people compete. So
Yeah,
there's just you just kind of have to deal
sure.
with it, I guess. Um, Another
Yeah,
thing that
that is true. We always have to deal with some variety wherever we go. Yeah.
another thing that was new was your new software, which I got a chance to take a look at, which frankly amazing. But I think we did have a few hiccups there.
Yeah, I've since looked at it and have discovered the issue behind it. But yeah, we had a bug, and when I say had a bug, wasn't something you could work around. Uh, and as we discovered, partway about an hour into the tournament or so, we discovered that scores were being applied to the wrong side, which is a pretty serious bug. So I went in there, tried to see if I could manually quick fix it and see if we could keep things up and running, and that just made it worse. And so we had to pivot to old school methods of running a tournament, which is just to show you, if you are going to run your tournament, don't rely on technology. You have to know how to do the old school methods. So that's a lesson for everyone. Be ready to pen and paper it if you have to.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you? So as I understand it, there was the moment where everything got erased. Like, how did you feel when that happened?
I mean, obviously, I was disappointed, but if you've ever been in an emergency situation, like with a kid who gets hurt or something, it's like you're not happy, but you don't have time to dwell on it and get really sad and upset. You've just got to deal with it. And that's exactly how I felt. I was like, well, this is not pleasant. I don't enjoy what I'm about to say, but I don't have time to sit here and be sad. So went up and just told everyone, so I made it worse. The data's gone. We either have to redo these matches or have to figure out and write down what everyone did. And everyone stepped up. I mean, the fencers were they understood. They actually probably felt worse for me than I felt for myself. and immediately started just like gathering the data. We sort of crowdsourced the information and managed to pick up where we left off. I was impressed, actually.
Yeah, it seemed to me that it didn't really put much of a damper on anything. It seemed everyone was really positive, and uh, yeah, it didn't feel like it changed much at all, honestly.
Yeah, I know. That was impressive. Everybody had some apps on their phones for keeping score because we do this anyway for our practices or whatever. So people use whatever apps they had on hand. We wrote things down. Chris's software was available for us to at least put the scores in and track the tournament overall. So yeah, we were able to pivot. I think actually quite successfully. I think we only probably lost maybe a half hour, if that, which is impressive
Yeah,
for
very,
such a
very
big.
impressive.
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to share something
So.
I learned about proctoring for the rules at the event, actually. And uh, I really only had two people that I kind of had to focus on, actually. Some people who I thought I might have to focus on, but not at all, actually. So that was cool. But one thing I learned, and I, I I think there's a certain amount of prompting that occurred automatically. So I did tell people that they could ask me questions, but usually people don't do that. Actually, they just kind of take it. But what I think changed here is I was very, very, very conscious to always, 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 and I tell people this, okay, but sometimes even I forget. I was very conscious to always give constructive feedback. Describe exactly what I'm seeing, right? Rigid arms, blade bent into the body, things like that. Whether it was long or short, things like that. And I think because I was being so specific, it prompted people to ask questions about what they were doing. And so a common thing that was going on was they thought they were doing something when they actually weren't, or they were doing it, but it was really late. Their timing wasn't correct. So they're like, "Aren't I pulling my arm back? I swear I'm pulling my arm back." And then I'm like, "You are, but it's too late. Like the hit has already happened. All the force has already gone into it, and by the time you're pulling, it's already passed. So it's not really being effective, right?" And that turned out that was actually really common, and that turned out to be a very useful way to explain it to people who were not getting it. And then that started to make it a lot better, actually, once they got that feedback. And then and then once I had someone on red card also, they were really, really well behaved after that, actually. So I think the major thing that I learned from doing that, though, is, and we talked about this also, which is that it's not, I'm trying to approach it not as a punishment or a penalty, but just as a method to help people learn what they are doing, because people don't necessarily know what they are doing, right? I've been correcting people for a while who thought that they were striking with accuracy, but they were actually exceeding their targets by 12, 18 inches, and they don't know that, especially in the heat of battle. So everything we're doing is just a tool to assist our fencers in being able to play the game as it's meant to be played. So I think that's something that we should try to pass on to other officials and people who may end up reffing, because I think that'll help them.
The summary takeaway is, I like what you said. You said, I like how you said, we need to be treating our fencers like adults. I think when we are being nice about our penalties, especially with power, and that we're actually treating people with kid gloves, and that actually shows a lack of respect. So people are able to learn now because you were able to give that immediate feedback. I wonder too, do you feel it helped that you ran that little workshop in the beginning so that people felt safe, like they could come to you and see, what they were doing?
That's a really good question. I think it was good for a variety of reasons. I don't know if it was good for that particular reason, but I think there were a few factors in the simple fact that I was just there the whole day, just standing right there, so everyone knew I was watching. So I think that was an important component. And as I said, I think the way that I was giving the feedback was able to prompt them to ask specific questions, given that I was giving them specific feedback. If the workshop helped with that too, then I think that's great. Uh, for other reasons, I thought it was good just to give people an opportunity to warm up and meet each other, and also kind of calibrate, so to speak, if that makes any sense.
A point in line.
Yeah.
It did stab.
And then
I think everyone appreciates that sort of reminder at the beginning.
Yeah, I think I didn't really expect that actually. So, and we have a tournament tomorrow here in Westminster. So I think we may want to just try repeating that as well, actually, because I think it had multiple benefits actually. So that was a good thing to learn. That's funny because I kind of came up with it on the spot. I was like, all right, it's gonna be interactive. It's gonna be interactive orientation. We've been showing that one safety video, and I haven't been happy with it for quite some time. To the point where I actually cut out pieces of it on the YouTube channel because I didn't want them to see certain things anymore. So I'll just jump in from then on and fill in that part because I didn't like it.
Yeah. There's something about interactivity, right? That just makes it different.
Yes, I think that's right. The funniest part about it, though, and I think this is a good segue into the next part, is the performance of some of our newer competitors. Bobby Zavala, who is the champ at TSL currently. Obviously, when we know someone's coming in from TSL, we know that the striking is a bit heavier there. There's a bit more armor worn, so we're a bit more wary. He was the person I worried about the least ultimately, because I watched him for a while and I got bored. not because he was a boring fencer, but because he was so conscious and conscientious of his fencing. So of anyone, when at the very start, when I showed them what to do and how to pull their punches, he would exaggerate it so much. Okay. And I can almost guarantee he did that because we did the demonstration at the start and they had a chance to practice it, and he exaggerated more than anyone. Okay. And I told you about this already, but when I watched him, he'd strike, he'd pull his hand, really exaggerate, and then he would look at me, okay? And I would give him the thumbs up like this. Okay? And he would do it multiple times. And it was like, not to, we just talked about treating with people with kids' gloves, but I mean this in the nicest way. I just thought it was kind of adorable, if I may say that.
Yes. But also refreshing as a ref and
it's really appreciated actually. It makes me feel like I can trust you, because as a ref, and especially not as a professional person trained to be a referee, and I know maybe that's the wrong word, but we didn't go through a more formal process. We had to create it ourselves, right? And so we're still learning how to do it. So as a person who wasn't trained as like an NFL referee or something like that, there's a certain degree to which you have to get over your desire to, these are your friends, right? We know everyone, and so punishing them or teaching them, is hard. And when they're amenable to it, it's a lot easier. You don't have to get over this hurdle. You don't have to get over this willpower thing. It's like, okay, this person is combative and I need to shore up my willpower, my dominance, my alpha, and get in there and show this person who's boss. Like that's stressful. It's stressful.
It is.
It really saps your energy in many ways. Even maybe it saps the enjoyment out of all this stuff. When someone is going to be amenable, it really, really makes you feel better actually, and much more just at ease in doing the job. Do you get that feeling?
Oh, 100%. I feel one of the things that surprised me at this event was how little I had to deal with power issues. Part of that was I had a power proctor. So going back to what we learned, having a power proctor is actually very, very useful. Because I like to think that I can see power, but there were times where even you were like, well, I didn't like what happened to the leg there, and I'm like, man, it just wasn't even, I wasn't even processing that. I was so focused on the movement and the contacts. So super helpful to have something like that. And it's stressful. It's stressful when you have to deal with power things that keep happening, because then you do feel like you're being that sort of babysitter bad guy, and you don't want to be, right? It just starts to build after a while. Like, I don't want to be the nanny,
No,
but
not
I
at
gotta
all.
be.
Yeah, no, not at all, not at all. But yeah, it's definitely helpful. Even myself, I noticed that when I'm doing any refing, yeah, it helps a lot to just have someone else whose job is to handle that. I have the same issue trying to spot all of that at the same time. We're asking a lot, you know.
It is. Yeah.
So how do we feel about? So now we've talked about Bobby. Bobby. He did pretty good, and I believe he. What grade did Bobby earn? Who's
See.
a formal member now. So he debuted at C. That's you know, it's an amazing performance for first time out.
Yeah. Oh
Um,
yeah.
how did you feel now? Because you were reffing, so you have front row seat to a lot of this stuff. How would you describe his style, and do you think it was distinct from a typical new Lightspeed fencer, or was it distinct from the other Lightspeed fencers there?
Yeah, I mean, he felt very similar to watching Ryan for the first time, or other guys who are new from TSL. They do have a sort of distinct style,
Hmm.
which is this sort of sniping
Mm-hmm.
sort of style that's really quick, get him fast, and then get out. So I think what these guys bring to the table is accuracy. I think
Mm-hmm.
just training in other disciplines, they are trained on accuracy, and it translates surprisingly well with our sport, because it is hard to be accurate while slashing. But I guess in other disciplines, you still have to be fast there too. So I guess that's where their training comes in. As fast as he is, I was also, I know this isn't, they aren't new, but it is interesting to talk about the guys from Georgia. It was he wasn't he was formidable, but man, the epi skills that Georgia brought really changed the dynamic there as well. These guys are also fast, but they also move fast. Their footwork and their distance control, but still at high speeds, proved very frustrating for a lot of fencers.
I'm actually really grateful to have them because yeah, you're right. They're bringing a level of skill and athleticism, and this is the wrong word, I think, but the closest thing I can come up with is professionalism. Um, in the sport, meaning they have much more formal training than a lot of us do
Yeah.
in an older discipline, and that's really it's really valuable, and I'm super grateful to bring that level of experience into the sport, especially for people who've been doing well for a while but really haven't necessarily had not necessarily fenced people at this basic level of athleticism and skill and footwork and things like that, which brings a huge thing to the table for sure.
Oh yeah.
uh,
Yeah,
mhm.
their formality. I like how you mentioned that. They brought a formality to the sport. Even when it came to how they referred to me as a ref, like, I mean, I appreciate it. I almost felt like a little like, whoa, like you're being so formal, but it was always like, sir, may I leave the ring? And it
Yes.
was like, wow. It made me wonder, like, are we too informal with our refing? But it was also appreciated. Like, okay, cool.
Actually, I mean, I have an answer for that actually, and at least in my space over here, I believe the answer is yes, actually. And I think to a large degree, I can't really fault people because again, it's still a small organization, and many of the fences are refs and they're our friends. Um, but the short answer is yes, we are often too informal. Um, as you know, I will hop into a tournament every once in a while, just to again kind of act like a not so secret shopper, and I'll give feedback, and a lot of people to my refs, and they'll often kind of treat it as kind of like abstract. It's like, okay, Kang, you've got the 10,000 foot view, whatever. But when I when I go in and I act and I try to give them feedback as, hey, think of me as a customer. I just paid $30 to enter this tournament. Imagine I am not on your team. I'm not your friend. I imagine I flew in from San Francisco, or I drove in from San Francisco. I drove 6 hours to get here, right? And I'm a customer, and I'm here to have a good tournament. I'm here to play fair, and you're kind of shooting the shit with this other person over there, and you're laughing and making jokes. And look, I get it, but like, this isn't where I'm not from here. And I'm a customer. All this is slowing it down. It's all making this less fun for me. Things like that, right? And so, I one thing I really try hard to do is to figure out how we look from the outside. Um, it's one of the main reasons that the officials of USFA, for example, are not necessarily fencers themselves. Like the CEO of USFA right now is not a fencer. Okay, and I think that's partly intentional because they want to get the viewpoint of someone who isn't a fencer, because otherwise you get kind of your head up in your own butt. And so you get the perspective from the outside. How does this look? If you want this to grow, you got to reach out to people who aren't fencers, right? So it's good to have that perspective. And so obviously I'm not that, but I try really hard to see what it looks like and see what it feels like. And so when I'm able to give that kind of feedback, I think it's a bit more, I think it drives the message home a bit more for them, actually. But yeah, I think the short answer is yeah, I think we are generally too informal.
Well, that's to chalk that up to things we learned. There's a degree of being, human, and so not being something you can't be approached. But we err too much on the other side sometimes. I've even noticed that I have a tendency sometimes to maybe try to crack a joke to like lighten the tension, and it's like that's probably not my place. I don't,
Yeah, maybe. I mean, if you're talking about tension, I mean that sounds serious to me. So I don't know how serious it is when you say that. So I think that's your prerogative to make especially that to me that sounds like something that has to do with safety, because I know I've heard of tournaments where two people mutually decided not to fight for the final. They decided it was too heated. Okay, this was out of Texas a few years ago. Two people decided it was too heated, and they were just like, you know what, let's just not do it. Okay, which I respect, I guess. But it's rough that it got to that point. So I would say that sounds like a safety issue. So maybe you do need to do something like that. So I wouldn't say that's necessarily bad. But if you're, but yeah, I think that's the general right idea as to where we should be heading.
Sure. But maybe what we're getting at is if you're getting too jokey and you're just trying to be one of the guys, right? I know as a fencer, I want my head ref to be consistent and reliable and trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I need to know that they're not buddies with the person across from me.
Yeah. So yeah, a good point. A very good point. Yeah. And I want them to be fast too. I want my refs to be fast. This is gonna sound kind of silly, but I love Lightspeed. I love fencing Lightspeed. And anything the refs do to delay me from playing pisses me off. Actually.
Interesting, because that brings me to maybe another thing learned was we were able to bring instant replay.
Right. Yeah.
And the fencers did not seem to love it. We used it once, and it ended up not being useful enough to overturn a play. And after that, they didn't use it. And then in the finals, when I mentioned how it works, I think Bobby was just like, don't care. Like, he just told us straight up, he's like, I'm not going to be using it. And I wonder how much of that is because in this sport, honor is a thing. And I think fencers would prefer that honor would be utilized instead of needing instant replay. But yeah, some fencers just seemed like, you know what, let's just fence it out. If I don't get the right call, I just have to get better. So kudos to them.
Yeah, I think it's very good that we have it at least on the table and in kind of cooking somewhere. I think that's a good thing. Almost certainly it'll be important in the future. So it's cool that it's on a burner somewhere. But yeah, I think you and I are on a similar mindset, which is trying to. I've said this before. I want it to be a sport for human beings, not for slow motion cameras. And generally, if it's not clear, I prefer that it gets tossed out. But that said, sometimes the refs may make a not a non-ideal decision or poor decision. It could be possible, and given that it could be the difference between one person getting one and the other person getting five, I can see why it matters, for sure. So
yeah, and you and I even talked about it. Speaking of things I learned, like next time I use instant replay, the issue was the replay did not make it clear that it was the opposite of what I called. And what I probably should have done in hindsight is been like, if it could go either way in the video, toss it. I think I took the wrong approach, which was it did not overturn. My call was still possible, and so I stuck with my call. Again, things you learn. That was the first time ever using instant replay. We also had the downside of the replay wasn't working as intended. Chris had to pivot and use a different camera, and it was a lower resolution. So if we had a higher resolution camera, maybe we would have seen that much better than it was. So yeah, lessons learned. I don't know if it drastically changed the outcome of that particular match. It was the bronze medal match. I mean, it was 5 points, but I don't recall what the final score was. So
yeah, the camera's got to be 60 FPS minimum, and yeah, it's got to have decent resolution on that. Absolutely, for certain. Well, one thing I am getting kick out of it is, of course, that Chris brought it to the table, and Chris is a trad fencer, and I don't know if they do this. I'm not sure if they do this everywhere, but I know at the Olympics because at the Olympics, you may not all speak the same language, or you're right. You may not speak French, for example. So to ask for your instant replay, you draw a box with your fingers.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
He was like,
yeah.
People were like, "How do I ask?"
Yeah,
and it was like, "Oh, just go like
I
this."
completely.
Like, oh.
This is such a like for me for people who aren't familiar, it's kind of like okay, whatever. For me, this is like an Easter egg. It's like a little. It's like a little, I don't know, nostalgic is the wrong word because this is happening now, but for me, it's almost like a nostalgic Easter egg for me. It's like, oh my gosh, they're doing the square! They're doing the square!
Yeah. So, it's one of those if you know moments.
Yeah. Now, did Chris go over the rules and regulations involved with using instant replays with you?
Yeah, so the way I told it to the people is in the final matches, you had 2 challenges. If you did a challenge and it did overturn the call in your favor, then you get to keep your challenge. But if it didn't, then your challenge is used up.
Oh, interesting. But on the perspective of the referees, the way they do it in trad fencing, did he explain that to you? So this is very interesting, okay? Especially if your viewpoint isn't very good, right? You could be watching a slow motion replay all day, right? So apparently, in trad fencing or at the Olympics, I'm not sure if there's any difference, but in the formal procedures for trad fencing, there's a limit to how many times you can watch the video. You can only watch it like 4 times, right? You can watch it at full speed a few times. You can watch it at slow speed a few times, and that's it. You're not allowed to continue. The referee has a limited amount of views they're allowed to use, which I thought was very interesting.
Wow. Yeah, because I think I replayed it like 5 times.
Yeah.
It was so close.
Yeah.
And that, again, should have been a clue. If any of those fencers in that particular match are watching me, if there's any consolation, if you didn't get the call you want, I learned from that experience, and we'll do better next time. But yeah, it's interesting. It just brings a whole new mix, by the way, to reffing in general. Yeah. We're just so used to we have to make our call and move on that as we improve that technology, I think there might be some good use for it, and could be appreciated.
Yeah,
because we do make mistakes, and we only have one view of the fight as it is.
Yeah. And despite what I've said about trying to make sure it's a sport for humans and not a sport for slow motion cameras, There is some merit, or I think there is some value to that pause, that moment of suspense and tension. What calls the referee gonna make, right? You have it in any sport,
Yeah.
football and whatever, where you're just waiting for the referee to explain their calling, right? And I think there is a certain amount of drama and value to it that adds to things. I just want to make sure it's not overly done, basically.
Right, exactly. To some extent, the refs are part of the story, and
Yeah.
sometimes they're villains, and that makes the story exciting.
Oh man.
I don't try to be a villain. I'm not looking to be a villain. But what I'm saying, right? When you get that call that you don't want, you're like, "Come on, ref, you blind," and that's just part of the game. And you go and you tell your friends that you would have won if it wasn't for those stupid refs. Part of the story.
So I want to move on to any possible strategies or tactics or methods that you thought seemed to be dominant in the tournament. Did anything come out? Did anything stand out to you besides the sniping that was going on? Do you think that was a dominant method or anything else?
I'll say, first of all, surprised to see an increase in improvement in defensives. I think defensives are increasing. There were fencers I've seen before. I'll shout out to Sean Friedman. Sean is right. Sean's the tall guy. The first thing I would always hear when someone was fencing him, I can't tell you how many times a fencer standing across from her like, "Oh, I so want to hit your helmet." Like it's like an achievement in a video game. Like if I could get there.
Oh my gosh.
Because he's
Headshot, yeah.
incredibly tall.
We should have a stat. We should everyone should receive a stat for just headshots against Sean Friedman, if possible.
Yeah. Sean shots. Yeah, I love it.
Sean shots. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. It is an achievement, but he takes advantage of it. And one of the things he does is he kind of lowers his blade and walks towards you with his blade down on the floor. And he says he does that because people think his reach is like normal. But he's tall, which means his arms are long. And he tries to just lure you close to a false sense of security. But on top of that, he's been improving on his defensive. So someone will come after him and he'll just bat that thing away and then usually hit helmet because that's actually the easiest target for him. And there are a few people who got that humble moment where they got not only defensive, but hitting the helmet and they're like, ouch. So shout out to him. But I thought I saw more defensives across the board overall. I don't know if you agree, but I was pleased with that.
I don't know if there were, but I did receive a comment from the Georgia folks since this was their sophomore outing, as also their first competition in Lightspeed involving other teams, I believe, right? Their first tournament was just it was basically an in-house tournament. And so I asked them, was it like what they expected, And I think I was talking to James Wallace, who's the captain, and he said that there were a lot more defensive than they were expecting. Because they're epeists, right? And in epee, there is parrying, but the dominant strategy in epee is to counter hit, okay? So they attack you, you kind of go off to the side a little bit and you strike at them off angle a little bit, or you interrupt their hit. That's the dominant way to do things. And so I thought it was really cool, and it made a lot of sense that they were surprised at this. And then, I mean, they were great. They did really well, obviously. Jake Wachtel took first, and then they won the team event as well. So I think, it was a little bit gratifying to have them realize there's more for them to do. There's more for them to go, And then B, it's also a little bit terrifying because they did so well. And then once they've seen this much defense going on and they realize they've got more to climb, they're going to become a whole even better. So I corroborate what you're saying.
Yeah. No, that's the. So speaking of strategy, I felt like that was the other thing I observed was having so many epeists come in and really just using epee strategies in general, epee techniques, was to me like a new strat that a lot of people haven't seen in Lightspeed who don't come from these other fencing disciplines. So it's like we're used to people who either, it's because we're a little bit more movie-like, a little bit more dramatic, right? Sometimes people like to like walk up slowly, some people like to circle the ring. You get a little bit more drama,
Mhm.
whereas Jake Wachtel, yeah, he earned his B this weekend, up from an E. Proved that just straight athletic technique matters. So people are going to have to adjust to that, because not everyone is an FA fencer, so they have to get ready for that speed, but not just speed from a distance. That's the thing. I was like, wow, they could just launch out at you, sometimes to their own detriment, right? There was a lot of ring outs for these
Oh
guys who are
yeah.
used to epee,
Oh
where you're
boy.
allowed to fletch right out of the ring, because it's like, okay, you're allowed to do that. It's like, nope, not in our sport. So we got some ring outs there.
I felt so bad about that because multiple times, they stepped out, yes, but also they stepped out after scoring a touch, and I was like, guys, I'm really sorry, but I have to invalidate that because you have to stay inside the box, Um, and I felt really bad about a few of those. But
Yeah.
I did try to explain to them why it was important, and because like I created that rule for myself, okay? Because I was an epee fencer as well, and so I can flesh what we call the bolt in our sport. And so I was already from the very beginning. I was getting my opponents into the corner, and then I would flesh at them because there's no handguard. There was no Ren Saber at the time, and there was no Tana Saber at the time, so blocking was difficult. So you just get someone stuck in the corner, they're gonna have a really hard time stopping you, right? So I created that rule for myself to prevent myself from just hammering at someone with a flesh once I got them into the corner. So especially I thought, I didn't want them to be frustrated, so I tried to explain to them when I was able to, this is why this exists, okay? So just so you understand, okay? And I would like to add something to speak for Jake Wachtel, because you're not wrong, okay? I mean, just great athleticism, great footwork, just really, really good, solid, straightforward fencing. But I feel like that miscast it a little bit because because I think that in our sport, good 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 fencing is also good looking fencing. And Jake pulled off some amazing fives from the back. I know I
Yeah,
saw
he
him
did.
do this at least twice. The first one was in the pool against Tony Zaldua. Um, there was only there was only a few seconds left, and Tony was down by 1 or something like that. And so Tony's rushing in, and he's cornering Jake at the very back of the box, right? Not only does Jake score this, he scored it with a 5. Okay, Tony comes in, he does a really uncommon deflector 5, comes around and strikes to the torso. Really clean, really beautiful. And he was like an inch from the edge. His foot was like an inch from the rope light, so it was a fantastic finish. And I saw him do it at least one other time. I can't remember where it was, but it was really, really well done, and it looked great too.
Oh
Especially with
yeah.
Tony chasing him down, it was a great moment.
Oh yeah. And even when he wasn't getting his fives, he was a very clean fencer. I mean, the number of times someone would like do the head tilt because they thought they had safe distance, and he would just get that hand and get away, but it was like so clean that we couldn't help but call it. It was
Yeah,
easy to see.
yeah.
For Jake, watching Jake is great. Like watching him, most of what he does is actually very clean and easy to ref. So I really appreciated that, and that's why he's earned his B. I think he deserved it.
Yeah, and speaking again for just to more that's interesting about him is he is a formally trained fencing coach, and he's been through our pilot program to along with other members of his team in Lightspeed, and we are actually optioning him as a new Lightspeed educator actually. So I think they're going to bring a lot of really cool stuff to the table. So knowing all this stuff, there's no surprise that he did so as well as he did.
Yes.
I do want to, for myself, I will mention something. I will not say too much. But I fenced him. I faced him. I had to face him a few times in the team event, and I was using Tano, and which I kind of regret at this point. Actually, I think that was not suitable at the moment. But I actually avoided him specifically. I tried not to fence against him actually. So I would wait for him to go, and then I would go after, assuming he wouldn't be back in. And the reason is he has a really good long lunge to the midsection, which is hard to block, and it has really long reach. I know exactly what to do against it, but I couldn't pull it off with a Tano Saber. I needed a Ray Saber, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it. So that's kind of why I avoided him the whole time as much as I was able to do. I wanted to ask you for the final match, and maybe we'll close this up soon. For the final match, he was pretty dominant against Bobby at the very beginning, and then Bobby started to make a comeback. What did Bobby do to change the game there to start to make up the distance?
That's a really good question. I sometimes wonder how much of it. This might have been a little bit of both, but I think Bobby was just Bobby made some changes, but I also think Jake was probably not used to our sort of long form final. He even asked us later, like, "You guys usually go this long?" And so we do like to go long if we can, because adding a bit of more endurance to the fight just adds another dimension where it's like it's not just enough to get a lead. You have to really maintain it for the long term, and we like to give people, especially at the higher levels, the option to pivot their strategies and try to make a comeback. Um, I think Bobby started to realize that he was not safe at long distances, and so I think he wasn't. I think he was just keeping his guard up more, and then just taking advantage of opportunities to snipe at him when Jake would come at him. But I also think Jake was tiring, because what Jake does, I mean, Jake fights really well, but it is a very energy.
Oh, hello.
It's
Hi.
Hi.
it's a very energy expending way. I'm having a hard time word. It's exhausting, basically, to keep that up for 48 points. It's very exhausting to just throw yourself and launch across the ring. So I think it was a mixture of two. A little bit of fatigue on one side, and Bobby realizing he couldn't just hang back and be safe, that he was always vulnerable. But it wasn't enough, because Jake just kept pressing him. He never fully ran out of steam, and so it ended up still being like an over 10-point difference when we got to the 6 minutes, which is a long time to fight. 6 minutes.
Yeah, I think you're right. That makes a lot of sense now that you pointed out his. Yeah, it's footwork on point, but he was basically always on, is always 100%. And yeah, I think Bobby had a slightly more relaxed stance, so probably served him for a little bit. But yeah, the endurance portion, yeah, that makes a lot of sense as to how that panned out.
Yeah, it was a good match.
Yeah. So, what's coming up next for Tennessee, Kevin?
I believe Georgia's next tournament is in May, so that's still a couple months out. Long Island's doing a tournament in like 2.5 weeks, so very soon. Yeah. Rochester is doing one.
End of April.
I forgot when end of April. Okay, so we got that coming up. I don't know what Virginia's up to. I haven't looked to see when their next one is, because I know Rockland, Maryland just did theirs, so that might be the next tournaments for now. And
yeah, I think yeah, it's we just put it up in the list. I can't remember where it was though, but yeah, I think it's I think it's April. Yeah, so coming up soon.
Speaking of April, the gal who worked the venue, her name was April, and she came to my practice yesterday.
Oh, fantastic!
So yeah, she saw what we were doing, and she came out. And it's funny that we were talking earlier about your little a workshop at the beginning on power. So as I was training her and showing her some how we attack and sort of those things, she said, "Oh yeah, I remember seeing you know, the CEO guy. I remember seeing him show how you break the arm and stuff. So it's like, even though she was way off in the back, just watching from a distance, she was paying attention.
Okay,
And
that's really
I
cool.
don't know, just thought that was kind of a fun coincidence. But she's come out. She's already talked to people who come into that venue, and so we might even be getting another person next week. So it goes to show that tournaments are another way to get the word out about your group. So,
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of
exciting.
which, tomorrow our tournament in Westminster will actually coincide with an anime festival. so,
Oh, really?
I don't know if this is our demographic or not, but we'll try. So,
This festival's at the mall.
yeah, yeah. I think it's
Oh,
called
okay. So people make it.
anime night market. Yeah, they it's a small con, it's a small convention. But I think they hold something every quarter. So it's a small con, but it's a frequent con, and they use the Westminster Mall.
Okay, cool. Well, hey, we'll get the word out, right? That's
Yeah, what I will say is, maybe we'll just tell him, hey, I mean, you're already holding a foam cardboard weapon anyway, so try picking this one up instead. So. The last time they were there, we had these two maid girls come in and they did a dance, and we just had them hold lightsabers while they did their dance. So, yeah.
all right. So next step, give him a helmet.
Yes.
Give him
Yes.
some
Give them
gloves.
helmets, so, all right. We'll see. Okay. Well, I think that's about all we've got time for. This. Let's see how people like this, and if it's any good, we'll do some more of these. What do you think, Kevin?
I agree. No, it's good to debrief on these things.
Yeah, very good. All right. So, this has been Kang Snow and Kevin Fournier for what do we call it? The quote unquote podcast? Right. Yeah.
Sure.
So, thanks for listening, and let us know what you thought, and we'll talk to you again soon, hopefully. All right. Thanks. Bye.